Chapter 16. New York City, 1896. Perfect silence. She could hear her own breath, ragged with excitement, escape into the frozen air. It was nearly dawn. The sky had been growing lighter for the last hour. Now she could see the thin black tree branches clustered in the distance and the lonely looming palace that stood behind them. Between the trees and the brick terrace where she stood was a long, steely expanse of empty ice, and there, directly before her eyes, was an angel perched on a marble pedestal. For a moment the world seemed to draw in its breath and wait, suspended, and then the first rays of the sun touched the city, and the icy roofs and branches glowed with light. She could feel it before she heard it. The great city awoke. Suddenly, the atmosphere began to crackle with the electricity of over 1 million lives. Sounds, isolated at first, grew and blended and formed the chorus of the day. Horses' hooves hammered against the granite streets. The early risers shouted greetings at one another. Streetcars rattled. Silvery sleigh bells jingled. Children whooped. Windows slammed shut against the cold, and machinery hummed to life once again. The first bundled and muffled pedestrians began to hurry through Central Park toward Fifth Avenue. Not one of them lifted his eyes to see the girl who stood, coatless, atop the terrace, watching the scene before her as though she could never see enough. Meteor, still saturated with the violet adornment of the boreal rainbow, was waiting patiently in the meadow below the terrace. Holly smiled at the picture her rainbow deer made, their brilliant shades glowing against the white expanse of snow. "Don't they look like magic?" She nodded her head in their direction. Tundra, sitting at her feet in an imitation of doggy obedience, murmured, "They are beautiful, but magic shocks the mortals, you know." Holly smiled. I have a plan, Tundra. Wait and see." Lightly, she ran to the meadow and whispered into Meteor's lavender ear. Tundra saw him nod and grin, and in a few moments, to his surprise, the rainbow deer had been reborn as a carousel, linked by silken ribbons. Holly came flying back to Tundra, her eyes shining. "There," she exclaimed. "Isn't it the most spectacular carousel you've ever seen? Don't you think the children will love it?" Tundra shook his head. "You thought of everything, didn't you?" Holly laughed. "I had a long time to plan, but I never thought there would be all the colors of the rainbow." An early riser, clad in a stiff black coat, strode by the terrace, firmly on his way to some important business. The rainbow deer, turning in their carousel ribbons, were apparently beneath his notice. He strode along, his eyes fixed on his own concerns. Tundra had agreed, during the sleigh ride, never to speak in the presence of a mortal, but now he murmured, "I don't think mortals are very observant, Holly." Captivated by the waking city, Holly didn't hear Tundra's words, but she turned to the sound of his voice and threw her arms around his neck. "Can you feel it? Can you feel how wonderful it is?" she said passionately. "This is everything. This is life." "I don't understand how dogs sit still for so long," he muttered. "Well, let's walk then." She waved to the angel. "Goodbye, angel." The angel was silent. "Remember, we don't talk here," said Tundra between his teeth. A mustachioed man in a fur-lined coat looked curiously at Holly as he walked by. "Is there something wrong with the way you're dressed, Holly?" Holly looked down at her clothes. She was wearing a simple shirtwaist above a long, graceful skirt of forest green patterned with holly leaves. "I think I'm supposed to have a hat and coat," she admitted. She paused to peer into her satchel and drew out a fashionably upswept hat featuring a satin ribbon that matched her skirt precisely and a green cloak. "How did she?" Holly murmured in surprise, slipping the cloak over her shoulders. The light material fell in handsome folds around her, giving the impression of a much heavier wrap. Clever Lexi. Next, she fastened the hat upon her shining wreath of hair with an alarmingly long hat pin, tucked up a few flying curls. "There," she said. "Do I look respectable?" Tundra eyed her. "I believe so. Humans would be better off with fur, in my opinion." Holly ran up the terrace steps and disappeared down the other side. Tundra hurried after her, and together they encountered the mall. The long thoroughfare was covered in snow, and a curtain of tree branches shielded it on each side. It was here that the city's wealthiest citizens came to parade in their Victorias and Landas, in the summer and their sleighs in the winter. The first of those was now turning up the avenue. A stiff coachman drove a fine pair of black horses, pulling a large, solidly built cutter, shell-shaped as fashion required, repleted with red leather seats, furred rugs, and jingling bells. Holly marveled at the proud horses and the elegance of the cutter. Yet there was something not especially cheering about the scene. As she pondered this, the expressionless coachman pulled tightly upon the reins and abruptly brought the cutter to a halt, disgorging a little band of children and a tightly wrapped lady with a large chin and a severe expression. Holly's heart lifted. Here, finally, were the children. She had been waiting all her life to meet them. She stepped forward eagerly, but her greeting died on her lips. "Charles, you will stand still," snapped the severe lady. "Alice, a young lady does not jump from one foot to the other. Jerome, Harrison, walk forward this instant. Evelyn, if I see your finger approach your nose again today, you shall be most sincerely sorry. Lines, please." The 5 children struggled into 2 lines, with the oldest boy, Charles, at the lead. "Play," cried the lady. "You may play for exactly 30 minutes, according to your father's instructions. Foolhardy as they are," she added in a mumble. With a sour face and a series of fussy flounces, she settled herself back into the carriage and began to read a book entitled The Depravity of the Impoverished Classes. As Holly looked on with growing unease, the 5 children walked, still in formation, to the frozen lawn. There they stopped still and waited for the 30 minutes to pass. The littlest boy, Harrison, bent down and picked up a stick, but he did not seem to know what to do with it afterward. Holly couldn't stand it. On an impulse, she went toward the silent cluster of children with her arms outstretched. "Come, children," she called. "Shall we make snow angels?" They looked at her suspiciously. Finally, Charles said, "What's a snow angel?" Holly smiled. "Come, I'll show you." The 5 children exchanged glances and, apparently concluding that anything was better than standing around, they followed her to a spot in the lawn where the snow lay untouched and thick. Holly threw off her cloak and hat. "Look, you hold out your arms and fall into the snow as flat as you can without losing your breath." She fell backward like a monument toppling. "Then you wave your arms," she said, "so it will look like you have wings. And then," she said, carefully rising, "you get to get up without ruining your angel. That's the hardest part. See," she concluded triumphantly, "a perfect angel." The children regarded her with round eyes. "You're a young lady," squeaked Alice after a moment, "and you fell in the snow on purpose." "It was fun," said Holly. "Even young ladies have to have fun. Come on." They seemed paralyzed with surprise. Evelyn's finger rose cautiously to her nose. Then Harrison said in a clear voice, "I bet I could do that." He walked to a fresh patch of snow and flopped back in it. "Hey," he said after a moment, "this is fun." Slowly, he extricated himself from the snow, mangling his angel just a bit. "I'm going to do it again," he said. "I've got to get up better." "Me too," said Jerome. "It would look nice if we all did it together," suggested Holly. "Then we could make a row of angels." "Yes," said Evelyn unexpectedly. "Let's do that." For the first time, the 5 children played instead of waiting silently in the snow for the exercise to be over. They ran and slid and threw themselves enthusiastically into the snow. Harrison got the idea of drawing pictures with his stick, and Alice built a snowman. Thoroughly involved in her book, Miss Bellows, their governess, noticed nothing, not even the time, and a glistening hour ticked by. "Let's go over to the lake and go skating," said Holly. She sat down breathlessly after helping Alice complete her second snowman. "Yes!" the children shouted in unison. Evelyn wrapped her hand in Holly's. Holly jumped to her feet and donned her cloak and hat. Cheerfully, the children swarmed after her as she turned northward. "Come along," she cried. "Charles!" shrilled a furious voice. "Alice, Evelyn, Jerome, Harrison! Come this instant!" Miss Bellows slammed her book shut and strode toward the little group. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you exhibit such wicked behavior? Cavorting with a stranger!" Her voice whistled with rage. The children, abashed, offered no defense. They dropped their eyes and fell into sudden silence. Holly looked on with horror. She stared at Miss Bellows' too big chin and finally broke into her tirade. "Excuse me, Miss Bellows. It was my suggestion, going to the lake. The children are not to blame." The grim face turned toward her. "And who, pray tell, are you?" snapped the governess. "My name is Holly Claus." The sharp eyes took in her disheveled appearance, and Holly hastily tucked her flyaway hair back under her hat. "And under whose authority have you invited the children in my care to go skating with ruffians?" "Under my own," said Holly steadily. "I am afraid, Miss Claus, or whoever you are, that is insufficient. The children of Dr. Louis Braunfels do not proceed in such a disordered fashion, and they most certainly do not skate in the kind of low company you obviously find attractive." "What do you mean by low company?" asked Holly, honestly curious. Miss Bellows turned redder than ever. "The common, squalid characters who frequent the lake is what I mean by low company, Miss Claus." "Oh," said Holly, staring at Miss Bellows' face. "That's what you mean," she repeated absently. "And now I bid you good day," snapped Miss Bellows. Holly tilted her head questioningly. She seemed to be thinking about something far different than the topic at hand. She looked into Miss Bellows' small blue eyes for a moment, until the governess dropped her gaze. The children watched, open mouths, for Miss Bellows appeared suddenly not to know what to do. She was twisting her handkerchief in the strangest fashion. "What are you afraid of?" said Holly softly. "The children," gulped Miss Bellows. "Why?" asked Holly. "Because they hate me." "No, they are frightened of you, but they do not hate you. They will love you if you love them." Holly looked intently into Miss Bellows' eyes, and then transferred Evelyn's hand from her own to her governess's. Miss Bellows swallowed visibly. Evelyn, staring at her governess's fearful face, suddenly felt a rush of compassion for Miss Bellows. "It's all right, Miss Bellows," she said. "We'll go home now." The governess looked uncertainly at the other children. Charles glanced at Holly, who nodded encouragingly at him. "Yes, Miss Bellows," he said, nodding. "We'll go home and have our lessons. Perhaps you can tell us more about the constellations. That was awfully interesting. Let's go home." He took Miss Bellows by the arm. Hastily, Alice kissed Holly's cheek, and Harrison and Jerome followed suit. "Goodbye, Holly, goodbye," they called. Harrison, trailing behind, whacked the tree trunks with his stick. "That's a bit better," said Holly, looking after them. "But my heavens, what a tangle these mortals get themselves in." "Your father says it's because they're afraid," said Tundra under his breath. "Yes, Papa knows." She thought of her father, peering mildly over his spectacles, and felt a stab of homesickness. Holly picked up her satchel. "Let's go to the carousel. I want to tell Meteor and the others how beautiful they are. Perhaps we'll meet some low company. They must be happier than the high company." The mall was thronged with sleighs and little cutters now. Horses paraded by, their bells jingling merrily, and even the pampered bundles in the seats behind seemed to have been energized by the irresistible morning. Ladies put back their veils and greeted one another. Young men lifted their smooth black hats at the passing ladies and called out jovially to one another, "Frozen yet, Taylor? Splendid morning, isn't it, Brace? Mind on the right, Bostwick." More than one appreciative glance rested on Holly as she stood watching the surging traffic with a slight smile on her lips and a vibrant look of interest that was utterly unlike the cool composure prized by society ladies of the day. "Remarkably pretty girl, that," said one young man to his companion as the horse trotted past. "Don't fancy the dog, though, La," commented his friend, gazing at Tundra. "Looks like the sort with big teeth." "Now, now," said La, bravery and chivalry nap. "Let's turn around here and drive by once more. Perhaps she'll take a bow." He turned his horse smoothly and retraced his path, but Holly was nowhere to be seen. "Where's she got herself to, then?" he muttered. Then, "Whoa, whoa, what's the trouble up there, Nap?" He pulled violently on the reins to keep his horse from plunging off the path. "What in dickens?" "It's a kid," said Nap sourly, "right in the middle of the way. Get off, you filthy brat," he called. A very small child was standing in the middle of the avenue, staring at the dozens of horses and vehicles around him. Drivers called out threats and issued harsh commands, but the child, frozen in confusion, stood rooted to the spot. Law, having regained control of his horse, spit out a curse. And when that failed to dislodge the boy, he reached for his whip. Holly appeared at the child's side, her cheeks flushed with running. "What are you doing?" she cried furiously at Law. "What on earth are you doing?" she repeated, catching sight of his hand upon the whip. Law turned pink and dropped the whip as though it were on fire. "Child's a danger to the horses running into the road like that," he muttered. "A danger to the horses?" Holly repeated in such disbelief that Law blushed further. "He's a child." Turning to the urchin, who was staring at her in wonder, she said, "May I pick you up?" The boy nodded solemnly, and without a glance at the two shame-faced drivers, Holly took him up and walked to safety at the roadside. He was the first child she had ever held in her arms, after a lifetime of waiting, and she breathed in his sweet, dirty scent rapturously. After an extra hug, she set him gently on his feet. "Now, where is your mama?" she asked. The boy was silent. "Got no mama," he said finally. Holly looked at him anxiously. "Are you here with your papa?" "Got no papa." Who takes care of you?" "Nobody. I takes care of myself," the ragged boy said proudly. "How old are you?" demanded Holly. The boy rubbed his face. "I don't know." "Where do you live?" "Why, here," he replied, waving his arms about. Holly looked around at the bright snow and leafless trees. "In the park?" "Yeah, look, I'll show you." "Lady don't want to see nothing like that," said a rough voice. An older boy had slipped from between the trees and now clasped the little one under the elbow. "I'll just take him, ma'am," he said to Holly. "You don't have to worry about him no more." "Who are you?" asked Holly. "This is Jemmy," said the little boy with the air of one presenting royalty. "Jeremy," said the older boy instantly. He can't say it. "Pleased to meet you, Jeremy," said Holly with a smile. "I'm Holly. What's your name, dear?" She asked the small child. "Bat," he answered promptly. "Bat?" repeated Holly. "Bat, 'cause I can see in the dark, like a bat." At this, Jeremy seemed to feel that the child had revealed too much, but he once again took Bat's elbow. "We'll be off now, ma'am," he said with a polite bow, and Holly was struck by his grace and innate good manners, which made his patched clothes and general grubbiness unnoticeable. "Do you live in the park too?" she asked to keep him from leaving. "Sometimes," answered Jeremy. "Sometimes Jemmy gets a job," said Bat. "What he means is I get a room when I have a job, but now I'm staying here." Holly looked around the snowy woods. "Where do you sleep?" "I'll show you," said Bat eagerly, but Jeremy tightened his hand. "Lady don't want to see it," he said firmly. "Oh, but I do, Jeremy," said Holly. "Really, I do." "No, ma'am." "But why?" cried Holly in disappointment. "Not for the likes of you to see," Jeremy said stiffly. "Oh, Jemmy, she won't tell," interrupted Bat. Holly turned to the older boy. "Is that what you're concerned about?" She smiled. "I won't tell a soul. And besides," she laughed, "I wouldn't know who to tell." Jeremy had long ago learned that faces told more truth than words. And in the warmth of Holly's smile, his doubts began to dissolve. He looked at her curiously. "Where are you from? You're not one of the ladies." He pointed his chin at the passing sleighs. "That's right, I'm not. I'm from a country far away," replied Holly. "Italy," said Bat, looking wise. "All you know," said Jeremy scornfully. She talks English, don't she? She has blue eyes and gold hair, don't she? She's not from Italy." "Come on, Jemmy, let's take her to the place," pleaded Bat. "Okay," conceded Jeremy. They began to walk toward a thickly wooded section of the park, Bat running ahead and Tundra padding behind. "I got a dog too," said Jeremy, looking backward. "You'll see him at the place. He ain't as big as yours, though. That one looks like a wolf." Tundra choked, and Holly quickly began asking questions. She learned that Jeremy was 11, and Bat was thought to be about 4. "Don't know for sure," said Jeremy. "Just came wandering along one day when he was a little tyke. Couldn't barely talk or nothing, but we took care of him." "He said he has no mother or father," said Holly hesitantly. "Yeah, probably not. Do you?" There was a pause. "I got 'em," said Jeremy grimly. "They ain't dead yet." You don't know where they are? Holly asked. She did not want to hurt him with her questions. No, but I can bet you that wherever they are, they're drunk. Drunk? Asked Holly. Jeremy grinned. You really are from another country, ain't ya? They turned a corner and, in a tiny clearing screened by rocks and thick bushes, Holly saw a ragged group of children huddled around the embers of a very small fire. There were perhaps 15 or 20, ranging from 2 bats' age to several boys whom Holly took to be older than Jeremy. Though the majority were boys, Holly saw a good number of girls too, dressed in layers of pinafores and dresses, their thin legs wrapped in rags. The children all stared intently at the fire, as though their watching could keep it from dying, and Holly, looking at their thin cheeks, thought she had never seen such wretched faces. One girl, who was supported by another, began to cough a thick, painful cough. After the attack was over, she lay down on a thin blanket next to the brightest part of the fire and closed her eyes. Bat ran to the little cluster. Jemmy's here! All of the children looked up quickly. The smallest children began to smile. They called out, Hi there, Jeremy! What's the news? Got any food? A small, rascally-looking white dog appeared from behind a clump of bushes, wagging his tail wildly. Jeremy strode energetically toward the group. Why so glum? He demanded. You hungry? He began pulling knobby packages from his pockets and distributing bread around the little band. Marty, I thought I told you go get some more wood. He tossed a stump of bread into the air, and the little dog caught it efficiently. I went a-lookin', sniffed a big boy with black hair sticking out in tufts under his worn cap, but there was cops everywhere. Well, go on, get some now. I didn't see any of them, and I just came through the mall. Reluctantly, the boy rose and ambled off. Hi, sidewalk, Jeremy said to the dog, who was now clambering around his knees in a frenzy of welcome. This here's my dog I told you about, he said to Holly proudly. His name's Sidewalk, 'cause I found him on one, and 'cause he walks sideways. Holly noticed that the little dog circling around Jeremy did have a peculiar sideways gait, like a circus horse. It was a cheering sight. I've never seen a dog do that, she said, and, forgetting that she was in mortal territory, dropped to her knees. Why do you walk sideways? She asked the dog curiously. Assuming the question was directed to him, Jeremy said, I guess he got his leg broke when he was little, and that's how he learned to walk with it. Come on now, Sidewalk, leave the lady alone. The dog, recognizing Holly's sympathetic heart, if not her words, licked her cheek enthusiastically. It's all right, she said, rising. She glanced at Tundra and noticed with amusement the scandalized look on his face. Jeremy's attention had shifted. He approached the sleeping girl and put his hand on her cheek. He whistled. She's burning hot. At least someone is, said a shivering girl. Wake up now, Lissy. I brought you some chocolate, said Jeremy softly to the little figure on the ground. I got a blanket, too. The girl opened her eyes. Chocolate? She murmured. For real? Of course it's for real. Come on, sit up. Jeremy lifted her up and gave her a small packet, which she eagerly opened to reveal a smooth, dark square of chocolate. Oh, said all the other children, their eyes fixed upon the morsel. That's for Lissy now, said Jeremy sternly, and the others nodded. Who's the lady? Said a ragamuffin of unknown gender, looking at Holly. Jeremy glanced up. That's Holly, he said. She wanted to see our place. He rose to his feet and approached her. What do you think? See, we sleep in there, except in the summer. He pointed proudly to a small shack constructed of thin wood gleaned from boxes and covered with a few flapping cloths. See, we got hay to keep us warm. He paused, clearly waiting for her to admire his home. But Holly was quiet. Her eyes moved from Lissy, who was licking the last bits of chocolate from her fingers, to Bat, who was shoving one of his pals off a log by the fireside so he could take his place. What kind of world was this, where children lived in the cold, cared for one another, and stared at food with hungry eyes? Was this part of mortal life? How could it be? How could Earth have been arranged so that children were cold and hungry? For the briefest moment, she wished she were back in the land of the immortals, hidden away among the silver trees. But no, she thought in a flash of comprehension, for that is exactly how these children came to be here, by people hiding from the sight of their hunger and hopelessness. No, she blurted out involuntarily. Jeremy looked at her curiously. No what? He asked. Holly collected herself. I must do something, she thought. I must help them if I can. She turned to Jeremy with a smile. You've managed beautifully, Jeremy, she said, and I can see that you take good care of these children. Yeah, said Jeremy roughly, trying to hide his pride. We do all right here. His eyes darkened. Except Lissy. She's not doing too good. Is there a doctor? Began Holly tentatively, but she was interrupted by Jeremy's bitter laughter. Tried to take her, didn't I? I had money too, but won't let us in. His voice rose in an indignant imitation. Get out of here, you vermin! That's what she said to me and Lissy. I wanted to smash the place, but I didn't, did I? 'Cause it wouldn't do her no good anyhow. His fist clenched. So I got her some warm food instead. Helped her more than a doctor, probably. Jeremy, said Holly urgently, are they hungry right now? He looked at her. Of course they're hungry. They're always hungry. Let's go get food for them, begged Holly. With what money? I ain't worked in a couple days. Money? Holly was near tears. You need money to get food? Gracious, said Jeremy, looking at her in awe. Where in the world do you come from? I come from a place called Forever, the land of the immortals. There is no money there, said Holly with dignity. Beside her, Tundra rustled uneasily. Sheesh, how can I get there? Asked Jeremy. You can't, and for the moment, I can't either. My father will come for me on Christmas Day, and I will return with him. But Jeremy, I need to know. Your dad's coming on Christmas Day? Interrupted the boy. Yes, but Jeremy, how's he gonna get here? All the roads are closed because of the snow. He'll come by sleigh, but Jeremy, what? Where can I get some money? I want to buy some food. The boy sighed at her innocence. You can't just get it. You gotta get a job, you gotta work for it, or you gotta sell something. I guess that's another way to get money, but I never had nothing anyone wanted to buy. What do people want to buy? Demanded Holly. Oh, you know, houses, Jeremy said airily. Holly's face fell. And smaller stuff, he added, like jewelry and clothes and, fancy things. Jewelry? Cried Holly. Look, I've got a bracelet. She held out a slim wrist where a golden bangle glistened. Can we sell it and buy some food for the children? But what about you? If you spend it all on us kids, you ain't gonna have nothing to eat. Then I'll get a job, said Holly. Come on, let's go sell this and buy some food. Jeremy laughed at her impatience. Well, first you have to go to a jewelry store, and then they have to write you an order for the bank, and then you have to go there for the money, and after all that, you can go to the store to buy food. But that will take too long, cried Holly. What can I do now? Jeremy stared at the snowy ground, thinking. When he looked up, his eyes were shining. I know what. Half an hour later, the thing was accomplished. Jeremy led Holly, trailing Tundra, to a little pavilion where a bearded man named Henry McElhenney was serving sizzling sausages on toasted bread. His equally rosy wife poured generous cups of tea and cocoa at his side. Jeremy, an old friend of McElhenney's, opened negotiations with the confidence of a natural salesman, and within several minutes the deal was struck. In exchange for Holly's golden bracelet, McElhenney would feed all the hungry children who approached his stand until Christmas Day. Hands were clasped all around, and Holly, who realized that she was faint with hunger, asked if she might be the first customer. She was served 2 sausages with a flourish, and she and Jeremy settled down to the task of consuming their sandwiches immediately. Try as she might, Holly's tendency to wipe her mouth with her napkin slowed her down, and Jeremy finished long before she did. As he licked the last savory drops from his fingers, Holly suggested that he take the opportunity to tell the other children of their sausage windfall, and the next moment he was dashing back across the park. Holly watched him go, waving to passing acquaintances as he ran. He's a fine boy, said a voice at her side. She looked up to see McElhenney standing by her. Yes, she agreed warmly. He has a great spirit. They call him the king of the pack, McElhenney said, his eyes on the retreating figure. He knows every nook and cranny of it, and every child who comes here. I hope, Holly began, but did not know how to continue. Yes, said McElhenney, so do I. I hope that life does not break him. He sees too much misery. Woof, said Tundra flatly. Forgetting herself, Holly asked, "What'd you say?" Woof, he repeated more pressingly. She bent down to look at him. He crossed his eyes ever so slightly. "I think your dog is hungry," said McIlhenny. "Woof," Tundra said, nodding emphatically. "Look at that," crowed McIlhenny. "Anyone would think he understood what I said. Good dog." He got Tundra a sausage, which he gobbled down at once. She was just getting him a second when Jeremy returned with a horde of children. The rumor had flown through the park. There were sausages to be had at McIlhenny's, free for the asking. "Hi, Jeremy, is it true?" shouted a pair of twins, emerging from a nearby field. "Yeah, it's true. Come and get it," Jeremy called. "Present from my friend Miss Holly here." Urchins straggled out of the bushes and scampered up from the lake, greeting Jeremy with waves and hollers. He, in turn, brought each child before Holly with the whispered information. "She's the one that done it. Gave up her own gold bracelet. Say thank you. Go on, say it," until Holly begged him to stop. Soon McIlhenny's pavilion was filled to bursting with children chewing sausages. Holly had the pleasure of seeing Lizzie eat too, her eyes screwed up tight as the warm food filled her empty stomach. Bat was spilling cocoa ecstatically down his shirt as he lapped at it with his small pink tongue like a cat. Suddenly, an unpleasant voice cut across the din of chattering children. "Good gracious! It's turned into a pest house! Disgusting! We shall not be lunching here, Louise." Holly saw an elderly man, warmly wrapped in a fur-lined coat, staring at the children with an expression of revulsion. By his side stood a girl of about 10, his granddaughter, Holly presumed, looking at the scene with envy. "Step away, Louise," snapped the man. "Don't allow them to soil you." The girl, flushing with embarrassment at her grandfather's words, turned to go, but Jeremy, eyes flashing, called out, "We ain't pigs, mister." Startled, the silver-haired man stopped in his tracks. "How dare you address me, you young tramp?" he bellowed. The girl put her hand on his sleeve. "Come, grandfather," she said, her face flushing still more as all eyes turned upon her. "Leave go of me, Louise. Sir, I demand to know what you are about, harboring ruffians," shouted the old man toward McIlhenny. "I see no ruffians here," returned McIlhenny calmly, "lest I take you into account, Mr. Sterling." The old man gasped and drew himself up to his full height. "You will regret that, McIlhenny," he said with icy dignity, and swept away. Louise looked desperately from her retreating grandfather to the children, who regarded her solemnly. "I'm sorry," she stuttered. "My grandfather shouldn't have said what he did." "Louise!" came the call. "I'm sorry," the girl repeated, looking at Jeremy. He nodded, and she smiled gratefully and ran to catch up with her grandfather. "It's better than the poorhouse," Jeremy was saying sometime later. "They keep you shut up there until you think you're losing your mind, preaching and preaching at you day and night." The pavilion was empty now, except for Mr. McIlhenny and his wife, who chopped and mixed in the kitchen. The children, warmed through and well fed for the first time in many weeks, were actually playing. They had begun by slipping and sliding down the little hills nearby, but then Bat, perched upon the top of a rock, had caught sight of the miraculous rainbow carousel below. Lodged now inside a gazebo of ice, the deer pranced and capered. Bat stared. He rubbed his eyes, and then with a whoop, he scrambled down from his precipice. "You ain't gonna believe it," he hollered to Joan and Chick, who were rolling down a nearby hill. "Come on, you ain't gonna believe it." In seconds, the carousel was swarming with children. Each deer carried 2 or 3 wiggling riders, and when they began to turn in the glistening gyre, the frosty air was filled with shrieks of rapture. Oddly, the bundled grown-ups who scuttled along the nearby paths took no notice of the carousel and its delighted freight. Back in the quiet pavilion, Tundra snoozed next to Holly's chair, and Holly, her head propped upon her hand, listened to Jeremy's tale with sympathy. "So you came here?" "Yeah, came in the summer, when I was near on 8. No nicer place I ever been than the park on that summer that night. All the folks with houses lie sweltering and tossing, but out here in the cool air, why, we're the comfortablest people in New York City. But Jeremy, you can't live here always, said Holly. Dunno why not, replied Jeremy. Don't you want a home someday? Asked Holly. For a moment the boy kept his look of stubborn denial. Holly bent her head to see into his eyes, and something seemed to melt in his face. Well, yeah, I'd like to have a home, he admitted. Who wouldn't, I guess, but it ain't gonna happen, so there's no sense thinking on it. Why isn't it gonna happen? Asked Holly. Jeremy resumed his stubborn look. It just ain't. I got no schooling, no money, no nothing. If I'm lucky, I'll get to be a hopman or a railway or something like that. And maybe I'll have a little room to myself somewhere, but that's all. That's all. Holly kept her eyes on his. What would you be if you could choose anything? Jeremy ran his fingers over the table between them. I guess, he said after a moment. Guess I'd be a doctor, wouldn't I? So I could cure kids like Lissy. He spread his palms flat. But it ain't gonna happen, he said harshly, so I can just forget about it. Holly said nothing. I won't forget about it, she promised silently. Jeremy looked at her with curiosity. I've never met anyone like you. You look like a fine young lady, but you don't act like one. Well, thank you very much. What do I act like? Like no one I ever met. You act like you care about me and the other kids. I do, said Holly simply. They smiled at each other. We gotta find you a job, Jeremy said suddenly. You can't sleep in the park. No, said Holly with a trace of regret. I don't suppose I can. What's your name anyway? Your whole name? Holly Claus. What, like Santa Claus? Said Jeremy incredulously. Just exactly like Santa Claus. He's my father. Jeremy laughed. That's a good one. You said it so serious too. I'm perfectly serious, said Holly. Yeah, right, said Jeremy comfortably. I'm not so much of a kid that I believe in Santa Claus. Now it was Holly's turn to stare. You don't believe in Santa Claus? I've heard of such people, but I never thought I'd meet one. Jeremy sat up, unsettled by her obvious surprise. Come on now, no joking. Is your name really Claus? Why would I joke? My name is Holly Claus. I'm Santa Claus's daughter. I come from a world of immortals, and my father is their king. So now you're a princess, said Jeremy warily. Silly, I've been a princess this whole time. It's not very important. Jeremy folded his arms. Prove it. I can't prove it. What does it matter? What does it matter who I actually am? I'm here now, and I'm your friend. She is Holly Claus, daughter to Nicholas, the King of Forever, said a low voice, also known as Santa Claus. Hush, Tundra, said Holly. Your dog talked, Jeremy stammered. He's not supposed to, said Holly with disapproval. Dogs don't talk, said Jeremy nervously. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that I'm not a dog. I'm a wolf. Secondly, permit me to say that your disbelief in my king is most unmannerly, not to mention treasonous. Thirdly, perhaps your disbelief will be resolved by the simple realization that if I am not the average earthly wolf, then I must have come from somewhere else, namely, forever, the land of the immortals, as Princess Holly has been kind enough to inform you, Tundra said with dignity. I must insist that you keep all this information to yourself, he added. He talks, said Jeremy. He's from the land of the immortals. All the animals talk there, said Holly patiently. And you're a princess. Santa Claus's daughter, Jeremy repeated. That's right. Jeremy looked at Holly for a long time. It was a point of pride for Jeremy to never be surprised, but somehow this lady or girl or whatever she was surprised him. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met before, and he had gotten used to the idea that he had met pretty much every kind of person that the world held. But he could tell that she was different. Maybe it was her smile, which was sincere. Maybe it was that she listened to him, even though he was only a kid. Maybe she really was what she said. Maybe this one time he could accept something on faith. Maybe he grinned. I believe you. I don't know why, but I do. We're honored, said Tundra, with a slight note of exasperation. Hush, Tundra, said Holly. I'm glad you believe us, Jeremy. Of course you understand the importance of not telling anyone about Tundra talking. That's not what we're here for. Jeremy nodded. I won't tell no one. You can trust me. He looked wonderingly at the wolf. Never thought I'd see anything like this. A talking dog. I'm not a dog, Tundra sighed. A light was dawning over Jeremy's face. Oh boy, he said, looking at Holly. Do I have a job for you? They made an odd little troop, walking briskly, nearly running, as they hurried from Central Park down Fifth Avenue. If a passerby had stopped to take a second look, he would have been quite confounded. What on earth would a delicate young lady be doing in the company of a ragged street urchin and an enormous dog? Luckily, no one took a second look, so Holly, Jeremy, and Tundra ran through the thronging streets. At first, Holly was too easily distracted by the grand houses that lined Fifth Avenue. The sight of the Vanderbilt Chateau at 52nd Street stopped her abruptly. Jeremy was forced to retrace his steps to pull her from her trance. Come on, he said impatiently. We gotta hurry. She stared at the massive brick and marble mansion. I thought you didn't have kings here. Ain't no king that lives there, just a rich man. Come on, Holly, we can't be stopping now. They turned left and then left again. Now the streets were smaller, narrower, dirtier. The houses here had no tracery, turrets, nor stained glass windows. They were simple brownstones, old and a bit crumbly, with steep staircases. Then little shops began to replace the houses. A bakery with a tempting array of fragrant bread, a narrow shoemaker's shop, a dry goods store colored with bolt after bolt of fabric, a tiny bookshop with a sleeping owner. Jeremy came to a halt before a small storefront. Holly, hurrying behind, nearly ran into him. This is it, said Jeremy. The windows were curtained, and she looked up at the sign above the door. It was oval, and in fluid, graceful script were carved the words, Carol's Curiosities and Wonders. Holly closed her eyes tightly and opened them again. The shop was still there. She felt as though she had been traveling in an enormously long tunnel for days and days, and it had very suddenly ended, depositing her beneath this sign, Carol's Curiosities and Wonders. Curiosities and Wonders. The words were familiar. They were more than familiar. What's the matter, Holly? Oh, what's the matter, Holly? Said Tundra in a low voice. I feel odd, she confessed. I feel like I just dropped into a familiar but strange world from someplace far away. You have, Tundra reminded her. Yes, I know, but I feel like I've seen this sign before. Somewhere. Her voice trailed off. Tundra was looking dissatisfied. I'm sure it's nothing. Perhaps I saw it through the telescope. I'm sure that's all, she said quickly. Okay, Jeremy lowered his voice. It'll be just like I said back there. He jerked his head in the direction of the park. You're a young lady traveling to meet her granny well, it don't matter. Just traveling to meet her granny, and you stopped here for a few weeks. Holly opened her mouth to protest, but Jeremy continued. I know. Your pa's gonna come for you on Christmas Day, but we don't have to tell Mr. Kleiner that. And seeing as you're short on money and how you've had a position, Jeremy pronounced this word with great emphasis, in a toy factory, and that's how you ran into me, and I suggested it. We were thinking maybe you could find work here during the Christmas rush, he said, running out of breath. Got it? Holly nodded seriously. I think so. Where am I from? Maine, said Jeremy. Maine what? Maine. It's a state. It snows all the time, and there's wild woods and lots of animals. A brief wistfulness crossed the boy's face. It sounds lovely, Holly said, noting his expression. Yeah, said Jeremy. You ready? Holly nodded, and Jeremy pulled the door open. The familiar smell of wood, varnish, and paint wafted toward them, and Holly stepped into Carol's Curiosities and Wonders. Chapter 17.